Alright, and welcome to Pyramids Level 2. Now, in this very first example, it says find the volume of the pyramid below given the apothem is 5.19 inches. Now, we know that the apothem goes from the center to the midpoint of any side. However, I think it's always important to draw your apothem here so that it connects to our slant height. If you will recall from our previous video, remember this is represented by an L, and of course that is our slant height. Now the reason I do this is twofold. One, I want to label my apothem is 5.19, and two, it's always important to see that your height, your slant height, and your apothem actually form a right triangle. And we're actually going to have to use this in just 1 second. But let's go ahead and get started. So, example 1 says this, find the volume of the pyramid. Well, we're going to start here with our formula. We know that the volume of a pyramid is equal to 1/3 the area of the base times the height. Now this problem really comes in 3 parts. Part 1, we need to find the area of the base. Part 2, we need to find the height. And part 3, we need to put it all together. So let me go ahead and start right over here. And let's just write capital B equals. And whenever we see the capital B, the area of the base, I look here and I see that my base has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. And we know that whenever we have a base with 5 or more sides, it's actually the area, we're finding the area of a regular polygon. And if you were to look at your formula chart, we know that that's going to be 1/2 the apothem times the perimeter. Now here we actually have everything we need. So let's go ahead and start filling it in. So we know, okay, our area of our base is equal to 1/2, or if you're using your cell phone calculator, you can think of it as 0.5, times the apothem, which we were given as 5.19, times, and our perimeter is the only thing we have to kind of calculate here. See, I see that this one side is 6 inches long, and perimeter is where we add up all the sides. So we have one side, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like we said earlier, and so our perimeter, of course, will be 6 times 6, the number of sides. And we know that 6 times 6, of course, gives us 36. So I come back up here to perimeter, and let's fill in that 36. Now from here, let's go ahead and multiply all these things together. So 0.5 times 5.19 times 36, and of course we get this. The area of the base of our regular polygon was 93.42, and of course in this case it would be inches squared. Now let's go back to our original formula, the volume of a pyramid. Let's start plugging this in. So we have 1/3 parentheses. We know the area of our base is 93.42 times, and here's where the problem gets a little bit trickier. This is why it's our level 2 problem. We actually don't know the height. So let me go ahead and switch to a different color, kind of like this UT orange, and we actually see, hey, this is our height, and since we don't know it, we do know this line though, that's actually our slant height, and we do know the apothem, and of course, as I stated earlier, we see that these 3 things actually make a right triangle. So this really brings us to part 2, in that we want to figure out what is the height. And how would I do that? Well, I'll draw my right triangle right there. I know that this side is 7. I know the base is 5.19, and we're looking for h, the height. Well, whenever we have a triangle and we have 2 sides, we're missing the third, we always want to use the Pythagorean Theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now I know if I draw an arrow through my right angle, it will always point to our c value. So in this case, we can actually write this. We can write h, the height squared, plus parentheses 5.19 squared is equal to 7 squared. And from here we can go ahead and start doing some simple algebra. Now it appears that I'm actually starting to run out of room, so here's what I'm going to do. We're going to go ahead and erase what I have here for the area of the base. And then let's just go ahead and start this problem all the way at the top, right here. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy down what we have. We see, okay, we're going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And we filled it in. We said, hey, okay, our height squared plus our base, or I'm sorry, the b, that's b for one of the sides, not the base, my apologies, is equal to 7 squared. Now let's go ahead and start figuring out what these things are. So h squared cannot be simplified or reduced plus, but I can do 5.19 squared. And remember, 5.19 squared is essentially the same as 5.19 times itself, 5.19. And that will give us 26.94 after our round. And finally, we'll have 7 squared, and we know that 7 squared is 49. Now from here, if I want to get the h squared by itself, we're going to have to subtract 26.94 minus 26.94. And that zero pair leaves us h squared equals, and let's see, 49 minus 26.94 will give us 22.06. Now from here we know that in order to get rid of a square, we have to take the square root of both sides. And of course h will equal, and the square root of 22.06 will give us 4.69. And of course in this case, inches. Now that is our height. And once again, let me just kind of erase what we see right here, just so it's not so cluttered. That was just what we wrote earlier. Okay. And now finally, let's go ahead and do it like this. We know that we have the volume is equal to 1/3, parentheses, 93.42 times the height. And since we found this height in this UT kind of burnt orange here, let's go ahead and write 4.69. And now once we multiply these three things, we will get our volume. Okay. Now, if you're using a cell phone calculator and you can't really access that fraction of 1/3, we know that 1/3 is essentially 0.3 repeating. So I like to write 0.33333 times 93.42 times 4.69. And of course, this will give us our volume of 146. That's a 4. 146.03. And in this case, it'll be inches cubed. Now I know that was a lot. I would encourage you to pause the video, finish writing down these notes, and we are going to go ahead and move on to example 2. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at example 2. Example 2 asks us to find the surface area of the pyramid below. Well, I want to start always by writing down the relevant formula, and in this case, we know that the surface area of a pyramid will always equal 1/2 the perimeter times the slant height plus the area of the base. And what we want to do is start filling in things from left to right as we know them. So let's write this. S equals 1/2, or you could write 0.5, that's okay as well, times the perimeter, and the perimeter is the first thing that we'll actually have to find on our own. So I look right here, and I see, okay, well this side is 16, so my length is 16, and we're always going to do the perimeter times the number of sides. And we see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, so we can simply do 16 times 4, which will of course give us 64. I know that the perimeter is, in this case, 64 units long because they don't give us any type of measurement here. So let's go ahead and write in for the perimeter 64. Now here we have to find the slant height, and I think this is the most difficult part of this problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a point right here on the midpoint, and I like to go to the side. And if you'll recall, our slant height essentially goes from the tip top of the pyramid all the way down to the midpoint, and it's represented by the letter L. And then, of course, if we connect from this midpoint, or the center of the pyramid, to that midpoint of that line, we actually see that we have formed a right triangle. So, in finding L, our slant height, we're going to have to draw a right triangle separately. And note that the height is 15. This is L, our slant height, what we're trying to find. But we need to know this line right here. Well, if you will recall, if this whole line is 16, and this goes from the center, or, aka half, we'd ask ourselves, what is half of 16? And of course, that's going to be 8. So now, much like in our previous example, we know that we have two sides of a right triangle, and in order to get the third side, of course, we're going to use the Pythagorean Theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, let's go ahead and fill these things in, and I always like to draw an arrow through my right angle because I know this always points to the hypotenuse or the letter C. So in this case, 15 or 8 could either be A or B, it really doesn't matter. So let's write 15 squared plus 8 squared equals, and of course in this case, finding the slant height, L squared. Now, what I would do is I would first simplify this by figuring out what is 15 squared. And while that's a little bit more obscure, 15 times 15 will give us 225. I would encourage you to memorize that fact. 15 squared is 225. Plus, we should know that 8 squared is 64 is equal to L. Now, what is 225 plus 64? Well, that's going to give us 289. And, oh, I forgot my square there. And we know that 289 is far too big. In order to get the L by itself, we're going to have to take the square root. Now, of course, what I do to the right, I have to do to the left, and those cancel, and we're left with this. The square root of 289 will, of course, give us 17. Well, now that I know my slant height, 17, I can go back in here, plug that in, plus, and the very final thing that I need is the area of the base. Now, of course, to do this, we know that when we look at a square, the area of a square, disregard that. The area of a square is the side squared, or in this case, if we have one side of 16, well, we can do 16 squared, which will give us, I believe, 256, but I always encourage you to use your calculator just so you don't make a mistake. Let's see. 16 squared will, of course, give us 256. Now, I plug in that 256 right there, and let's go ahead and do this in two parts. Part number 1, let's multiply these three things. And so we see, all right, 0.5 times 64 times 17 will give us 544 plus 256. And finally, the surface area of this pyramid will be 544 plus 256, and that will give us 800 even. And of course, I started writing inches, but this is units, and because it's area, it will be units squared. Well, I hope this video helps. Good luck, and I'll see you guys in our level 3 video.